Guys, welcome back. It is your favorite Gimp of the Limp, and I'm here with a special treat for you all. I have Urban Battle. This is by Forsage Games, and Forsage Games, if you don't know, are the people behind the very excellent Age of Dogfights World War I and now World War II. That one just released. I'm going to be covering it soon. It's going to be a little while before I can get to that one. I've got some stuff in front of it that I got to handle first, but I absolutely loved World War I. Is very, very excellent game. So much better than I could have ever hoped it was going to come out. It's excellent. Can't wait to get into World War II. It'll be a little while before I can get to it, but I'm squeezing in Urban Battle very quickly because they're going to be running a campaign on it soon, and the rules aren't hard to understand. So I wanted to jump on this, just smash a video out. So this one isn't as prepared as I usually like to do them, but I'm rushing it to make sure I get it up in time for them. So let's go down to the table and take a look at the game. All right, so here we are down at the table. I have a little bit of Urban Battle set up to show you guys. Now remember, I said I'm going to be reviewing both. But what you see in front of you right now is the main Urban Battle game. I'm going to go over the differences for the Urban Battle Junior after I show you the components and the basic gameplay of this game. Now, keep in mind, like I mentioned, this is a pre-production copy. It's close to production, so this is basically what you can expect in lines with the game, but it's not the absolute final version of everything. All right, so when it comes to the actual components, we'll go over the tanks last because there's a little, some specifics, some stuff I want to touch on when it comes to the tanks themselves. But you're not going to have a whole lot of other components to deal with. You are going to have a couple of maps. I have one set up in front of you now. This is the bigger of the two maps that comes with the Urban Battle main game. And then there is another piece as well that you can attach to it. And you can basically think of it as making it a full 6 sections. So once they're folded up, they're about this size. This is the other one folded in half, and this one folds into 4s. So all told, put together, it can make a map 6 times the size of this. I'm going to show you the rule book and the scenario book because mine is a pre-production. It's printed off version. But the rule book is small, and there's a scenario book that comes with a bunch of different battles in it as well. All right, so besides the map and the tanks, you are also going to have a selection of 3 dice. And I feel kind of bad. I feel like I'm the one that calls them to start doing this. Is they still have their nice wooden dice. I really like their dice. They just have a good feel to them. But the stickers are pre-applied now, and they did that with everything. They've got all the stickers put on, so you don't have to do any stickering yourself. And I think that might come from when I first reviewed Age of Dogfights 1, because I hated putting the stickers on everything. And I complained so much about it, I think they started doing this. It's appreciated. It's definitely appreciated that they do this, but I know that's a lot of work on their part to get all of this already set up. But your dice are good to go. You're going to have 3 of them. Now, they're not just 3 regular dice. One of them is. The red one is just a regular D6, 1 through 6. The purple one is a different combat dice. We'll get into that when we start talking about combat, how that works. It's close to a D6, but there's some different weighted numbers on there. And then the smaller one, the blue one here, is a movement die. This is an optional die. You do not have to use it, but it can be used to apply some variability to the movement of the tanks. Besides that, there's also a selection of these little black squares. And what you would do with these is if a tank is destroyed, you can place it underneath it. It fills up the square quite nicely, and it marks that unit as being destroyed. You don't have to use these though. You can also just tip the unit on its side to signify the fact that it has been previously destroyed. Me personally, I would probably just skip the squares and just go with tipping the unit over. I think that's simplistic enough to take care of it. There are also these blue rectangles, and these can be placed next to a tank to signify that it is moved and shot, or it has just moved and it hasn't shot. Basically, you can use it to signify during gameplay which tanks have activated or not, and whether or not they have fired, depending on if the hollow side is up or down. Also, we have this very nice compass here that spins around, And at first I was like, what is this going to be used for? And this is actually used for indirect fire. There is an optional rule to the game that allows your indirect fire to drift over into a separate square. Basically, you can miss long, miss short, stuff like that. I really like the inclusion of this. That is actually very neat. It's not just hit or miss with some of your indirect fire assets. This is something that I very much like. We'll touch on this a little more when we get into how combat is done. There is also 3 rulers with the game. They are each 10 inches long, or at least I think that's an inch. We'll say it's an inch. It looks like an inch. 10 long, and you can clip them together to make them longer. So this is 2 rulers that I have used the clip to put together. There's a third that you can attach to the end to make it very long to measure, whatever. But this is also an optional rule. Depending on which version of the game you're playing will determine whether or not you're going to use the ruler or not. And then finally, before we touch on the tanks themselves, one little player aid to worry about. And this has all the information you're going to need for all the different vehicles and all the different game modes, because like I said, there's multiple ways to play this game, and everything is listed down right here. You don't have to worry about it. No other forms. This is just single-sided, really simple to understand. Your numbers are here or here, just depending on what version of the game that you're playing. And then like over here, for example, we have our armor values, drive type, so wheeled or tracked. That matters when it comes to turning. Speed is how many steps they can move. Their effectiveness is basically their point total, so how much they cost. Bigger, heavier vehicles with better guns and heavier armor obviously cost more. Light stuff like a light reconnaissance vehicle is a couple points, whereas things like a heavy assault gun is 7 points. Now, we'll touch on this in the actual gameplay itself, but understand these 2 columns here: basic or realistic mode, and then absolute mode. So that's basically 3 ways that you can play the game. And a couple of them are going to use the dice, and then one just has a static number for it. No dice rolling needed if you don't want to have to use dice for your gameplay. Now, as you just saw on that player aid, there are a lot of different types of vehicles in this game. There are light tanks, there are reconnaissance vehicles, medium tanks, heavy tanks, tank destroyers, heavy tank destroyers, assault guns, any number of different vehicles. And there's just a huge amount that come with this game. When I'm saying huge, I mean there's a lot. I've got the green side over here with some tanks, and then the beige side, and they're both the different types. So you see here's a bag full. These are all the ones that I haven't set out. So it's not like you've got just a few vehicles. You've got a bunch in here. There's a lot of vehicles. So you can have some really big games if you want to. And it is the same way with the other type. Now, what do I mean by other type? Well, these are the injection molded, and these are the 3D printed. The only real difference you're going to have between these 2 types is the fact that one has rotating turrets and one does not. So look right here. It's a little stiff, but you see turret can move, right? This guy, turret can't move. You can see there's a turret on it, but it does not move. The injection molded vehicles do not have any rotating turrets. The 3D printed ones do have rotating turrets. And then after comparing the vehicles, I mean, you can see here, this is a mortar. We've got a medium tank here, right? And then let me grab a medium tank for the injection molded. And the only real difference is you can see there's some crease lines, the spalling that you have from injection molded. You'd have to trim those off if that's something that bothers you. But that's the only real difference in the 2 different types of vehicles. And honestly, I think both are serviceable. I really see no real big push to get either one. It just depends if you want the ability to rotate your turrets or not. That is something that can be an optional rule to the game. and it can only come into effect if you have these types of vehicles. That's the one optional rule that you can't use with the injection molded vehicles. It's rather small rule, but if you want to have access to every single optional rule possible for the game, go with the 3D printed. If the turrets rotating doesn't bother you, then go with the injection molded ones. I think they're perfectly serviceable. So I'm showing you guys both, but keep in mind, like when you get the game, it's going to have one or the other. Just whatever you choose. It's really up to you on that. Small, slight difference on where the vehicles put things like their command tanks, like the symbol here signifies a command tank. Plugs in on the side on the injection molded vehicle and plugs in at the top for the 3D printed one. But honestly, I really don't see a huge difference. It is nice to be able to turn the turrets. It's a nice little thing. If I had to choose between the two, I would go with the 3D printed. But like I said, both are perfectly serviceable for the game. All right, but the big question is, how does the game play? How does everything work? Well, let's get into it. We've got the 3 different game modes. Like I said, basic, absolute, and realistic are your 3 different game modes. Basic and realistic are the most similar in that they use the dice. And understand, when it comes to absolute, basically all it's doing is eliminating the dice roll and just giving you a static number. So when I explain how these dice rolls work for combat, just understand you wouldn't roll dice at all. You would just have a static number and try to beat the armor. So with the gameplay itself, you're going to have a varied selection of missions. You can have things like capture a flag, capture the point, destroy the command tank. There's multiple different scenarios that you can do, and you're going to fight them over these relatively urban battlefields. So these brown and gray items here, these all signify buildings, and the areas in between them signify roads. There's some other areas like little grass areas here, bridges, or water terrain as well, just depending on which part of the map that you're at. So let's first talk about a basic game and how a basic game is going to work. Each side's going to have a X amount of effectiveness points to spend. Let's say it's 50. Well, you would add together your choice of 50 points worth of all these different vehicles. You can go with a bunch of lighter vehicles, so you can have a swarm, or maybe you want to have a bunch of heavy vehicles, so you've got more armor and more firepower, but then you're going to have less vehicles on the board. And that will come into play because you activate units depending on your total amount of tanks in the game. So when it comes to your activations, depending on your tank values or how many you have on the board, and this is not including ones that are destroyed. So as you lose vehicles, this number is going to go down. You'll activate anywhere between 2 and 6 of your vehicles. And again, that's why you're going to use the little blue rectangles here to signify which ones you've already activated and what they've done. They can either move or move and shoot. You can't shoot and move in this game. So you have to either just shoot or shoot after moving. You will be able to move up to your speed value. You can use this die if you want some variability to that. So let's say our little light reconnaissance vehicle here has a speed value of 6. We roll the die. We got a +2. He would have 8 this turn. But this does have negative numbers on it as well. So you can lose some of your value. That's just up to you on if you want to have a little more random factor to that and not just have a set movement. Now, when your vehicles are moving, they can do a number of different things. Each move straight ahead, either orthogonally or diagonally, counts as 1. So you can move ahead 1 or rotate 45 degrees, and that counts as 1. Wheeled vehicles can only rotate a limited number of times. Tracked vehicles can rotate in their same space as many times as they want to. So let's say our light reconnaissance vehicle is here. Maybe he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He can stop there. He does not have to spend all his points. And you don't want to get right on top of the enemy unless you don't want to get shot, because you can't shoot enemy vehicles that are adjacent. There has to be at least one square in between you and your target. So movement itself is really easy to understand. You're either going forward or you're rotating by 45 degrees, and you're doing that in any number of steps that you want. So you can rotate, move one, rotate, move one, rotate, move one, whatever, up to whatever your movement value is. Obviously, heavier vehicles are going to have less movement points than lighter vehicles are. Once you are done moving, or if you don't want to move, then you can conduct any fire that you want to with that vehicle. Let's say again, our reconnaissance vehicle here wants to fire at this enemy medium tank. Depending on what direction your fire comes in is going to determine what their armor value is going to be. So right here, I have a frontal shot on that medium tank. So you would look at your little chart here, go to medium tank. What's its front armor value? It is 7. 7 is going to be pretty high for this vehicle because the penetration value is going to be the armor value plus distance. That's what you're trying to beat. And you have to beat it with your firepower. His firepower is a 3 plus a red die. So he gets to roll this. So the medium tank's armor is effectively 7 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 squares away. That makes his total value an 11. This actually means that the reconnaissance vehicle can't beat his armor value. The most he can get with that red die is a 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. He cannot beat that medium tank's value front on. But let's say the medium tank was facing this way. He was facing away and we had a rear shot. Well, now his rear armor value is only a 2. With a value of 2 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that means his total armor value is going to be a 7. That can be beat by the reconnaissance vehicle. So when it comes to the basic gameplay, that is all you are trying to do. You are going to roll either the red or the red and purple die and add that to whatever your static value is. Each tank is going to have a static value listed down right here next to the dice. You see the heavier vehicles have the 2 dice plus a large number next to them, so they can obviously beat a higher armor value. The defensive value is just going to be the distance plus whatever armor value it is at the angle that they're being shot from. In the base game, you can only fire in the 8 cardinal directions. So up, down, left, right, and then the diagonals, right? And that's by turreted vehicles. Turreted vehicles can basically fire 360. That's if you're not using the turret rule. So keep in mind, that's basic game. Basic game, 8 cardinal directions. Realistic game is almost the same as the basic game, except now you don't just get to fire in the 8 cardinal directions. You can fire 360 up to anything that actually blocks your line of sight. So in a basic game, this recon vehicle could only fire at this medium tank. He could not hit this one because he doesn't have a direct line to it, right? He would have to either be over here or up here, one of the straight directions. In the realistic game, instead of just counting the squares, that's where the ruler comes in, and you can actually measure from the center of the vehicle to the center of your target. And we see here, the recon vehicle could fire at this medium tank, and the distance again would be 5. They're so close, it's comparable anyway. But you can make any shot in any 360 degree direction that you want to. It does not have to be in those set static straight lines anymore. So I'm going to give you a diagram here that'll help explain what I'm talking about better. This is the basic game. You can only fire in those 8 directions. Turreted vehicles, they can fire in that. If it is a hull mounted, right, so no turret, it can just fire in the 3 straight directions. It can't fire side or to the rear. However, if it's the realistic version, the straight lines go out. You can fire in any direction. and the turreted vehicles will have that 90-degree frontal angle that they can fire in. However, that will change just a little bit the armor areas for the vehicles. So it's very easy to tell in the basic game where the enemy tank is being hit, right? You're either straight in the rear, straight in the front, or any other angle is going to be into the side. With the realistic, it changes a little bit. You've got a 45-degree angle to the front, 45-degree angle to the rear, and then everything else is to the sides. Actually, 90-degree angle to the rear, 90-degree angle to the front. And just to give you guys a better picture of this, this becomes the armor values when you're using the realistic angles. So any shot that comes in from this front triangle here is going to hit in the front armor, and then you've got your side triangles, and then the rear. It makes it to where it's a little more likely to be able to get a rear shot, a little more likely to be able to get a front shot, and pretty much equal chances there for the side shots. And then if they are at a diagonal, same basic principle, 90 degrees for each of the directions. I personally like the realistic better. I think that is a deeper gameplay. The game isn't hard by any means. The rules aren't deep. There are only a handful of pages, but the realistic just brings it that little bit step further, gives it that extra bit of gameplay that I do like. All right, so it's pretty simple to understand when it comes to all the different unit values. It's whatever their dice value is, minus, distance and armor, plus their static firepower. Whatever is higher wins. It's either going to be a miss or it's going to be a kill. However, you do have the other vehicles that come into play with their indirect firepower. They can lob shots over things like buildings. They don't have to have a direct line of sight to be able to target an enemy vehicle. So things like your howitzers or your mortars, they're not going to have a direct line of sight. Now, they can have a direct line of sight, but what's more often going to happen is that a friendly unit is going to have a direct line of sight against their target. The main thing when it comes to the indirect fire is that the crossing parabolic arc, so the arced shot, can't be against an enemy unit that is directly against cover. So if our howitzer is way up here firing down, this tank is basically shielded by the building, so it has to be at least one out from wherever it is. Same for if it's narrow passages, just like tanks, it can't fire out off to the side. So for example purposes, let's just consider that these two tanks are far apart from each other, because there is a minimum range when it comes to these howitzers, depending on what strength they're firing, minimum range anywhere between like 5 and 9, that they have to be away from their target. They are not adding dice together to attack their target. What they are doing is multiplying their dice, and it's going to be the red dice times whatever number is located here. And what they are trying to do is beat the distance. Effectively, they're hitting the top of the tank, so there's no real armor to speak of, so they just have to meet or beat the distance. You would take, for example, our heavy howitzer here. It gets to multiply by 4. Let's roll. Says it's a 3, so it would have a 12 for its fire strength. And as long as this medium tank was 12 or under away from the howitzer, it would count as a hit and destroy the tank. And that is the same for all of these other vehicles. And again, when it comes to indirect fire, it can be either basic or realistic mode. What I mean by that is the same type of premise. You can either have just those 8 directional lines, the straight and the diagonals, or in this case, since these guys don't have turrets, just that front 90 degrees, so those front 3 angles. Or you can actually use the measuring ruler to judge the distance as well. And like I said, if the target vehicle does not have a direct line of sight, as long as a friendly vehicle has a line of sight to it, they can conduct that indirect fire. But when it comes to conducting fire in this game, any result of a 1 on the red die is going to be a miss. Doesn't matter if you beat their armor or not. This effectively is just, hey, some shots are going to miss. Don't forget, though, that I did say that you could have the wandering rule when it comes to the parabolic fire, so the indirect fire. In this case, we would just spin our little spinner here. And it's a nice spinner, too. So in this case, it drifts one to the northeast. It would hit right there if we missed our target. So that will come into play if you didn't actually meet your roll to destroy the target. And that can come in handy if there are enemy vehicles obviously adjacent to the target. You might drift and be able to take one of those out instead. That counts for your vehicles as well, so you can indirectly destroy your own vehicles. So when it comes to urban battle, the game can really be as deep or as complex as you want it to be. There's very basic rules, very streamlined rules that are very much easy enough to have your kids play with you if you want to do that. My little girls love these friggin' tanks. They've been playing with them since the box came in. I can't blame them. I like to play with them myself. But even with all the added extra rules to it, using the realistic mode, all that stuff added into it, it's still not a complex game. This is a game that you can learn in 30 minutes or under, and that's every rule to it. All the option rules added to it are just not that difficult. It's easy to understand the movement. It's easy to understand the firing. Roll your dice, count the distance. Did you hit or not? Did you beat that armor value plus distance? That's it. That's all you got to worry about. And if you don't want to roll the dice, you don't have to. They do have the static number that you would have to look for. Boom, just right there. And if you don't want to, so our reconnaissance vehicle, if we didn't want to roll dice for it, it would just have a straight combat value of 5. And that's what you would do. You would compare 5 to the distance and armor value of whatever vehicle you're targeting. Now, I think absolute mode makes it very easy for someone to maybe teach the game to someone. But in my opinion, I think realistic mode is really the way this game needs to be played. All right, so very quickly, we're going to talk about Urban Battle Junior. This is what I've showed you now, except pared down into a even more streamlined experience. So this is something that is even more basic than what I've just showed you guys, okay? It still comes with the injection molded tanks, not as many of the injection molded tanks, a couple of factions, 2 different colors, and rulebook, scenario book, and then a much more streamlined little player aid card here. You see there's a lot fewer vehicles to worry about, a lot simpler armor value, speed value, and firepower value. When it comes to this game, the real main difference, the movement's the same, except it is all handled by the dice, which are very much custom. And when we're talking about the dice here, you've got 2 values, blue and red on these dice, okay? And there's 4 of these dice that come with this game. When it comes to your movement values, it's going to either be blue +1, blue -1 for their movement value. All right. And then you would just look at whatever the blue number is. For the firepower, it's going to be the red number. So you don't have to roll different dice. It's the same dice. It just has 2 different numbers on it. So it's either going to be the blue number or the red number. Same principle to the game, right? So attack value for the firepower, you're going to take whatever the total of the red numbers from rolling this and compare that against their armor value plus distance. That's it. And it's the basic rules of this, streamlined with less unit types to worry about and easier movement rules. Also, the junior version only comes with 1 mounted board instead of 2, but it is the bigger board. So it is the board this size, which is 4 of those squares, those rectangles that I first showed you guys in the beginning of the vehicle. Or beginning of the video, excuse me. But basically think of the junior as a pared down version of the urban battle version, right? So less vehicles, less dice to worry about, fewer types, same basic premise, same basic rule structure in there, but easier to understand, smaller values. I don't even think there's any parabolic stuff to worry about. Let's see. No, anti-aircraft tank is it. So yeah, no even indirect fire to worry about when it comes to this game. That one is definitely very good for kids to play, to learn to play, something like that. But if you're a more hardcore war gamer, I would definitely go for the Urban Battle Big Boy version. But if your kids want to play the games with you, Junior might be something that will appeal to you. Anyway, let's go back up to the top for some final thoughts. All right, so now you guys have seen Urban Battle and Urban Battle Junior for that matter. Just understand Urban Battle Junior is a very basic pared down version of Urban Battle. If you want a cheaper game, if you want something that's easier for your kids to understand, Junior might be the way to go. Me personally, I think Battle's really where it's at. And they did tank chess back in the day, right? And I like tank chess. It was a fun game, simple game, nice little tank combat game, but it left you wanting a little more. And Urban Battle is that. It's taking tank chess and it's taking it to the next logical step, to an actual battlefield where there's buildings and bridges and rivers and all these different variety of tanks to go at it. And I really like what they've done with the game. When it comes to the components are great. They are very similar to their other games. So if you've played Age of Dogfights previously, that one did get a lot of sales. You'll understand the basic premise of the components they use. I don't know where they get their dice, but I love their dice. They just feel good. They've got a nice weighty, meaty feel in your hand. And they went ahead and put the damn stickers on, so I don't have to worry about it, which I always appreciate. But that was so nice of them to do that, because I complain too much about that. The stickers are not that big of a deal, but I hate doing stickers. But when it comes to the game itself, I like the game. I think it's a nice, streamlined, fun game that you can sit down, play out in an evening without a whole lot of huge thought process behind it. Some tank games, they can get a little unwieldy. You know, the other miniatures games out there that takes forever to get it to the table. Think stuff like, you know, Team Yankee or that Chung game that you've got to put together the minis, you got to paint them, you got to learn all these different book full of rules to play it, and it takes you forever to get it done. You got to set up all this terrain. Sometimes you just want to sit down and have some beer, have some pretzels, and, you know, chuck some dice and have a little tank game. Urban Battle does a really good job of providing that experience. Large variety of different vehicles, any number of different light vehicles, all the way to include trucks and half tracks. Now, these obviously don't really have a combat component in the game, but they can be used for special missions, and I like their inclusions. Now, when it comes to the tanks themselves, like I said, I really think you can't go wrong with either direction, either the injection molded or the turreted version. They're both fine. They're very, very, very similar. The only real difference is one set does have the rotating turrets. It's not that big of a deal. I would probably leave out the optional rule for the rotating turrets anyway. So, yeah, it wouldn't matter to me. If it matters to you, make sure you get the upgraded version. I think the injection molded ones are perfectly fine and serviceable. So if the cost savings is worth it, maybe go in that direction instead. Just understand you're going to have some mold lines you might want to trim off there at the end as well. The only real ding I'll give the tanks themselves is that there's only so many ways you can design a tank this big that make them different. All right. Obviously, does have a turret, does not have a turret, but you've got light, medium, heavy, super heavy tank. And when you get into like heavy and super heavy, there's minute differences. And I found myself looking at that little player aid like, okay, is this a heavy or super heavy? You can figure it out, but during your gameplay, you might have some confusion like, oh, this is super heavy. No, it's a heavy. You can do it. Just make sure you look at the profile of the tanks themselves. They're very distinct ridges on the tanks to determine whether or not it's this type or that type, whether or not the turret's forward, middle, or back. Things like that will help you be able to identify them rather easily. The rest of the vehicles are very easy to distinguish between each other. All the different artillery type vehicles are easily able to be told apart. trucks, half tracks, the recon vehicle, things like that. Very easy. It's just those few different tanks are a little bit harder to tell. But at the end of the day, I'm definitely going to give Urban Battle a recommend. I enjoy it. I think it's a fun game. I think it's a lighter game that people can have fun with without just, brain burning yourself over it. And it's easy to set up. The point values are small. You can figure out your forces quickly and play multiple battles in an evening. It's just a fun, light tank game. So yeah, I give Urban Battle 1 super heavy tank out of 10. Definitely recommend. That's going to be it for me. Y'all take care. I'll catch you in the next one.